Good afternoon in St. Petersburg. I'm here in Texas. It's still early in the morning, so we have some time difference. I'm sitting here in the chair office, actually, of the Department of Germanic Studies. Well, let me say first, my own connection to Steblin-Kamensky is basically through my Dr. Vater, Heinrich Beck. Heinrich Beck, the late Heinrich Beck, who wrote the Reallexikon, the founder of the Reallexikon der Germanischen Altertumskunde. And early on in his seminars, he introduced Steblin-Kamensky's Saga Mind, the Mirsagi, to us in 1980 or so, 1980s, early on. Very interesting, and I still know him, how enthusiastic he was about Steblin-Kamensky, old Heinrich Beck. My personal relation also goes via the runic inscriptions, his articles on runic writing, orthography in the archives, Archiv for Nordisk Philologie. So I just want to mention this and say homage à Steblin-Kamensky. Well, coming to my own issue, runic metrics. I just zoom in. I hope this works nicely. Yes, my own PowerPoint. Yeah, sometimes things work out nicely, I hope. They do. Come on, yep. Here we go. So just to begin with the literature, but I just move on into my things. Well, one Russian scholar who inspired me in doing my, do you hear me? One Russian scholar who inspired me in my studies on early runic metrics is particularly Olga Smenitskaya and her English translation of her work on Old Germanic metrics. And as I see it, Olga Smenitskaya, she spots minimal units of protoverse, and I go a bit longer. I think we have a kind of long line, which I call the proto-long line, because it's the precursor of the Old Germanic metrical structures, such as the Forten Iridislag, and I'll show you in my lecture why. I've just written an article in Philologia Germanica in Italy, so I will base some of my talk on this, but I will also elaborate on points in this. So as I see it, we have some residual questions and problems, of course, as we will ever have, but one of these problems is resolution. How does the resolution work in earliest Germanic, and of course also in the older languages, but particularly in early runic? We can take, let me start with a very easy example, the old Swedish rökstone. Do you hear me? The old Swedish rökstone. It has, you know, it's, if you read it in the old Theodoric interpretation, it reads Reith Jothreikerin Formodi Stidlir Flotna Strandu Reithmarar Sittir Nugarur au Gotasinum Skjaldi Fatladar Skati Maringa. Well, Sittir and Garur are disyllabic forms which clearly receive resolution, as they must be heavy lifts, and hence they are resolved. They are two short syllables, bimoraic. The bimoraic condition is fulfilled by resolution. So in Old Swedish, it is undoubtedly the case that we have resolution in the early Old Swedish rök stanza in the form Sittir and Garur, which are unsyncopated. But now going back to here, you have a translation. And by the way, Nelson Göring, in his new book from 2023, Prosody in Medieval English and Old Norse, makes the same point. So no problem here. When we go back to the runic inscriptions, the question is, how does resolution work there? Do we have it, and in which cases? So a clear case of resolution would be the Noleby stone, with the famous formula Runo Fahi Ragina Kundo, the rest of the inscription being non-metrical. I paint a rune, one stemming from the gods. Ragina again has two short syllables, Ragi, which form one heavy lift by resolution. So a clear case of the offline Ragi, the B line has resolution, and hence we get a heavy lift, which is stressed. The stress needs a heavy syllable in a way, the bimoraic condition. So we get Ragi as a kind of, here you see the Noleby stone, Ragi two light syllables form one heavy or bimoraic one, we get a heavy lift and hence resolution. But the question is, do we actually have resolution in other cases as well? And yes, we probably have. How about these forms? The Torsberg shape, the offline of Torsberg, ni vaje marir. Vaje, short A, and so two short syllables, but even more important, Gallahus, the Gallahus one, clever gastir, which is so often well discussed and well known, but it's not often stated that clever actually should receive resolution. And I come to this now right away. Irilar and Aguilar on the Rosseland stone, again, short vowels which are stressed, which receive heavy stress due to the bimoraic condition being fulfilled. So let's see it a bit closer. I just before I could also mention another important point for the Old Runic inscriptions, namely the syntactic criterion, which Olga Smenitskaya stresses in her work. An alliterative verse must also be a syntactic unit, and some researchers, like some colleagues of mine, have overstressed metricality. I'm totally, I agree with Olga, and hence a form like Hjörlevik is not really metrical, or it's at best semi-metrical, because it has line 1, Hadulaikar, ek hagustalzar, Shlaivido, mago minino. The first line involves a sentence fragment, not really which is connected by a kind of alliteration, namely name alliteration. But this is not enough to say that we are dealing with alliterative verse. So Hadulaika in a way is separated and has a kind of the function of a sentence fragment. So I would say, contrary to Edith Marold, for instance, in Kiel, I would say this is not good enough to be a long line proper or a metrical verse. Having said that, the same in a way applies to the Türke bracteate. We have at least a problem. Vurterunor an valchakurne heldar kunimundio. We have, if we just had on this bracteate, if we can isolate Vurterunor an valchakurne, then we have a long line. But if we have to take the whole rest with us, the long line is somehow destroyed, because what do we do with heldar kunimundio? Several scholars have suggested, well, we put it in front. Oh, it's just like, again, a kind of introduction. Heldar kunimundio. You see on the bracteate, it's sort of two parts. And we say this is separate, and then we have the long line, Vorte runor an valchakurne, and then we say he wrote the runes on foreign grain on the bracteate, and then we say we have pro-drop, we have the drop of the subject, which is possible. So maybe we can save Türke, but at least we cannot save the inscription I mentioned before, namely Hjörlevik. It is semi-metrical or non-metrical. Having said that, now I come back to the major problem, namely anacrusis and resolution, these two things which somehow are tied in with each other. Torsberg shape is a bit tricky with the online, because this O will thu thevar, ni vaye marir, there are two interpretations at hand. You see the beautiful Kupferstich drawing of the Torsberg shape with the runes very well readable. So the first O rune may be interpreted as a idiosyncratic rune, Othala, Ulthuthevar, Vayemarir, or more plausibly, I think, as a kind of graphological metathesis, as Volthuthevar, ni Vayemarir. Then we would have a minimal of online, Volthu then showing analogical A mutation as early as that, probable. It's perfectly possible, like sooner, sonar, the genitive sonar, which has A mutation, and genitive plural sonar, and hence the nominative singular sooner and also sonar. Ludwig Wimmer suggested this, and Alma Antonsen followed him, and several other scholars, Mies and so on. So it's perfectly possible. Say we allow for interpretation 2, Volthu thevar, ni vaye marir. Then we have the problem, the online is perfectly we have a 4 position online. The offline has unstressed ni, proclitic ni, if we say so. Vaye marir has 2 short syllables. And now my point, if we allow for resolution to occur, Vaje marir. A fully stressed position is likely to have resolution in order to get its stress in the Germanic done. It needs full stress and hence resolution is very likely. Vaje. If it resolves, then my argument is ni is not extrametrical. It's not anacrusis or what Häusler called Auftakt. Rather, it is part of the metrical scheme. Let's see at some other examples here. It would be something like if we compare it to the old Germanic C type of Sieversian taxonomy, Völusbau 3, nie svalar unnir. Svalar resolves in Old Norse, svalar, short A, short first syllable, svalar unnir. We have 3 positions only. So we need the proclitic or the first dip. We need the nye in order for the offline to be a full 4 position verse. And we have many other examples here, as you see. Near Uchpimin, the B line of a Völusbau 3-6, and so on. One scholar who agrees with me on this interpretation is, by the way, Nelson Goering in his new book. So the problem with Auftakt, I see my time is going, so I try to get it very compact. Andreas Häusler, whom I appreciate very much, but on this point, he had a very vague notion of Auftakt, as he thought that the long line on Germanic verse was a kind of takthaltige Rede, and then hence he accounted for Auftakt. But Auftakt, in his view, was something extrametrical, an extrametrical anacrusis in the narrow sense, which only supplements a metrical unit that is already complete. But I think in the early Runic inscriptions, this is not the case. If we look at this in Old Norse, we clearly have cases where we have proclitic dips, let's say unstressed dips, which are part of the metrical scheme. As I mentioned, Völusbau 3-4, vara sandr ne sair, ne svalar unnir. So svalar resolves, hence nye must be part of the metrical scheme in order to receive a 4 position verse. And Beowulf 2104 has a similar example, and so on. On the other hand, we have suspension of resolution in Old Norse, and why not accounting for it also in early Germanic? In order, if there is a weaker stress, then resolution is likely not to occur. Ambocht vera in Thrimsquither 26, vera disyllabic without resolution because of secondarily stressed bocht. Bocht is so heavily stressed that vera cannot resolve in this position. So there seems to be a rule that, and this is also in line with Hauker Þorgesson, by the way, and also Nelson Goering, that the resolution after unstressed material in order to get the full stress, but suspended after stressed syllable, and this applies particularly to A2K verses in Sievers type Old Germanic metrics. Having said that, Volthu Thevar in Torsberg allows for 2 scans. It could theoretically have 3 positions only with resolution, but more likely it has suspension of resolution after Volthu, which is of course heavily stressed, and Volthu has a heavy first syllable. So Thevar in this case in say Northwest Germanic or in Proto-Norse, the language of the old runic inscriptions, is likely not to resolve. Thevar 2 positions, so hence we have a full 4 position verse. I now move very quickly on because I see I only have 5 minutes left. Well, the Gallus golden horn, which is so well known. I mean, I'm here in Texas. Winfried Lehmann, the scholar who had this office here, he was his dissertation was about the Germanic long line, and I think the problem actually here is, what do we do with egg? After having said what I have said, is it resolved or is it, is it anacrustic or is it not anacrustic? Is it part of the metrical scheme or is it just Auftakt in Häusler's sense? Many scholars, I think, assume that it's, of course, the most likely scenario is egg is unstressed. It is proclitic in front of Levagastir, Holtiar. But the question then arises, is it a part of the metrical scheme or is it extrametrical? Is it anacrustic? And after thinking this over, I think clever again has this kind of problem. Clever, 2 light syllables. Clever in order to be fully stressed, the initial fully stressed alliterative ictus, ek clevergastir, holtiar, horna tavido, it must resolve, and it is likely that then ek forms part of the metrical scheme rather than being anacrustic, as Andreas Häusler would have it. So at this one point, I do not agree with Häusler, actually, with his altgermanische Verskunst. Well, so as I said, the bimoric minimum is a primary condition in Early Runic and in Old Germanic. And we have many cases in the Old Runic inscriptions, or let's say in the few cases where we have long lines, probable proto-long lines, as I would define them, vaje marir, clevergastir, we are likely to have resolution, and then the pre-tonic, or say the unstressed material, is likely to be part of the metrical scheme, ek being not anacrustic, but rather part of the metrical structure. Okay, I leave Jersberg because Jersberg is actually, as Olga Sminitskaya rightly stresses, is not a metrical verse. It's something like rhythmic. It's sort of alliterative, but it has also a kind of regular sentence structure, but it's not a metrical verse, so we can just do away with it. Rosseland, on the other hand, is actually a long line. Ek. There's only one problem with Vagigar, which means it could possibly be Vangigar, which it can have a long vowel. So Vagigar is a problematic word, and it's not fully, I've written in novella about it in 2020, but leaving this aside, Ek Vagigar, Irilar, Agilamundon. The offline Agilamundon, again, needs resolution in order to get the full stress right. Agi, Agil, needs two short syllables, which then need full stress and then resolution in order to occur. We sort of have 4 positions only. Then that's perfect. Ek Vagigar Irilar is probably a perfect online in Early Runic. So again, no problem, but resolution is likely to occur. So I'm coming to the close. As said, the leitmotif of my analysis here is the fusion and interaction of the sentence rhythm and the alliterative metrics in the sense of Olga Sminitskaya. I highly appreciate her work and her critical attitude towards metrics in Early Runic. But as said, I acknowledged the proto-long line, which obviously she does not, as I could understand her correctly. She acknowledges proto-verse units of the type Clevergastir, the dithematic names. So this is an issue we can further discuss. So in my view, what emerges is the proto-long line of early Northwest Germanic metrics. And as I have shown here, I've tried to define it more closely in regard to resolution and in regard to anacrusis, and also in regard to the series of unstressed syllables which it allows for. How many, actually I did not talk too much about this, but there is a certain limit, holtiar, which has, for example, two unstressed syllables after heavily stressed holt. So there is a kind of, the proto-long line allows for more than one unstressed position between the lifts, but this condition has to be further investigated. So I'm coming to the end. Actually, I'm ahead of my time, as sometimes I am. Those of you who want to see my last state-of-the-art report is Runica Metrica in Philologia Germanica. Thank you so far.
Thank you. Thank you, Mikhail, for your really interesting report. And would colleagues like to ask any questions? Есть ли у кого-нибудь вопросы?
Как бы экран открыть.
Мы вас слышим, Юрий Александрович.
То есть можно задать вопрос, да?
Можно.
It's not really a question, but a comment probably, or a question at the same time. I have noticed that while focusing on the resolution, your tone was somewhat apologizing, and many sentences which contained the word resolution or the term resolution began with if. But you have shown very convincingly that it plays the role in this poetics, I would say, as should be expected. Because it is sometimes it contradicts the Sievers's schemes, but they are based on somewhat later poetry. But
Exactly.
this the kind of poetry, and I believe it is poetry, was Indo-European, and so we should compare it with Greek and Latin. And since Sievers's law was operative here, we know that at the time, at the period, in proto language or early, at the early stages, it worked. I would revise probably the notion of suspension of resolution. Does it have to be suspended every time when we suspect it because of the of stress, which some believe to be dynamic? I'm not sure, and I'm not I'm more or less convinced that the poetry was and the meter was quantitative. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. That was a wonderful comment, Yuri. Thank you for that. I couldn't agree more. I think you're perfectly right. And the one thing, of course, that we have to have in mind is that the metrics of Early Runic is more linguistic or phonologically based. It is not so much based on metrical license as Old English metrics. Old English and Old High German, Old Saxon metrics has a kind of old metrical license of the tradition, which has formed a metrical rules, which no longer are necessarily purely phonologically based. The early metrics of this proto-longline, if I call it this way, is somehow phonological. That's at least my assumption. It's closer to a pure phonology, pure linguistically based, or let's say morphophonological than the later stages, because their Latin influence comes in and their classical schooling and the scriptoria, they have their rules, how to resolve, and things are no longer purely phonologically based. And that's, as I understand you correctly, we are perfectly in line on this point. So I agree with you. And so there are scholarly traditions later, particularly Beowulf. I think there are some things which cannot directly be compared between Beowulf, for example, Kaluza's law in Beowulf and resolution in the ancient Nordic runic inscriptions. There are things, there are poetic licenses coming in, which strict rules for the poets to achieve their meters. So that's point number one. And you mentioned suspension of resolution. Right, that's possible. I had that in mind. I can go back to one of my, if you say so, you would like maybe why to have it suspended, Wulthu Thevar, for example.
Yeah.
Then, okay, where do I have it here? Well, I can, Ni Vaje Marit. Here it is. Well, Wulthu Thevar, if we accept interpretation number two, Wulthu Thevar. Okay, even if it loses the, if you say, okay, it has resolution, it is absolutely eminently possible that it has, then of course what we can have is a kind of pause, or the fourth position being filled by a kind of Pausentakt, or kind of, because the fourth position, also there are few examples in Old Norse, I just got through them. you know, you have Atlakvida in Grænlandska, Sjá-eiga við Salhús, Sverðafull, which has three
Yeah.
positions only. So 3 positions in Atlakvida. We could have that. We could consider 3 position verses in.
That's what I meant. Yes, thank you.
I understand you. So we could have that in early Runic as well. So I agree that we have to leave that open. Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other question?
Hi, Mikhail, can you see me?
Hi. Yes.
It's Maria Volkonskaya, and greetings from Ilya Sverdlov. Well, I have actually a very simple question. So if the possibly unstressed, well, if we suppose that runic inscriptions give us an example of the proto-verse, is there actually any criterion to define whether the possibly unstressed ek is part of a metrical scheme or anacrustic? So, and what would that criterion be?
That is a very good question. That is sort of that is very to the point. That's why I tried to go as, you know, we researchers, we move slowly, and we try not to override our at least good scholars do not override their assumptions and making coming to far-fetched conclusions. So I considered this several times, and your question is a very intelligent one, and it is also a difficult one, because as I see it, the bulk of literature until now on Old Germanic, including Lehmann and Andreas Häusler and modern scholars, have taught this as being anacrustic. That means it could possibly be dropped. But I think actually I'm no longer sure, because clever, as I said, clever is likely, as Yuri also says, likely phonologically to resolve in order to get the stress right, to get the full stress. Clever needs to be resolved. And then we have clever as if it was one heavy syllable, gastir, as the, I would, as in the, on the, it is an online. The argument is weaker than with the offline, but still I think we have good grounds on which to assume that ek also is part of the metrical scheme. One argument is actually that the cases of anacrusis in Old Norse, they can almost all be explained away. My colleague Haukur Þorgeirsson has written an article in the Journal of Germanic Linguistics in 2012, where he argued almost 90 or 95% of all the cases which Sievers, and Sievers was very critical, Sievers distinguished very clearly between anacrusis and metrically mandatory material which has to be there. And if we follow, given the fact that also in Old Norse, the cases of anacrusis actually are minimized, so our understanding of anacrusis is that it is almost not there in Old Norse. That is at least a strong argument also for me here in front of, well, the criterion you ask for is this light position, this light, it is a dip. If it is a kind of dip position in front of a heavy lift, so it doesn't look, it's difficult, but accounting for the proto-longline, my argument also is that the proto-longline is freer, still more free than the Old Germanic, the Old Germanic followers of the longline. See, for example, Holtiar in the Gallahus inscription. It has 2 unstressed syllables following the ictus syllable Holt. The filling, the proto-longline, as I would define it, has more possibilities, is still freer, and it is phonologically based, as we said just in the beginning. So it has more, it is a possibility to have more syllables, and it looks to me, so you asked, it's your question, of course, is difficult for me to answer straightforwardly, because ek it is very easy to say it's auftakt, and then we push it, and then we have Hlevagastir, Holtjar, Hona, Tavido, because we have enough syllables in a way. But Hleva still is resolved, and then we have we have a dithematic name, Hlevagastir, which then only somehow has 3 positions. And it is very well feasible that ek is part of the metrical overall scheme. So we should, of course, our problem with early Norse, to say the least, is that our material is so restricted, and even the new runic inscriptions from Sringarud in Eastern Norway have no interesting. Actually, they are rather uninteresting for us who deal with metrical structure, syntactic structure, because they have so short inscriptions and they say something about writing. But our problem generally is that we have these few examples which we have to analyze again and again. But my point is, in this lecture, I am very careful to say, I'm a bit cautious to say that ek is anacrustic, and I'm not sure anymore, and I think it's not. Even in the A line, I would hazard to say that it is not anacrustic, that it is a mandatory part of the scheme. The exact conditions of this proto-long line, it's hard to give you, but as said, the proto-long line has resolution in a phonological sense. It has it allows for quite some unstressed syllables between the lifts, and maybe anacrusis is at least must be questioned. So sorry, at this point I don't want to say more.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, can I ask a question?
Yes, please do.
Thank you. Well, my name is Anton Simmerling, and I'm interested in uncontestable evidence that personal pronouns like ek already were proclitic in early Germanic. Do we just stick to alliterative poetry and state that these words usually or never get into the ictus positions, or do have some other evidence? For instance, the pronunciation, the fate of ek, its weakening. Why not acknowledge it as a stressed word? That's my question.
Good question. Of course, a very good question. I think there is ek. I think ek, as also I've read Olga's work carefully, and as I see it, she also allows for both stressed and unstressed ek. I think we have both. The first thing to say, after in front of the 3 alliterative ictuses, H, it is for me, and it looks highly likely that ek is not stressed in this position. But of course, we have the development of ek to ik, and even we have this transition from e to e already in some inscriptions around 450 or 500. So there seems to be there are several reasons why ek, at least I think there are both possibilities. Ek is has both a stressed variant, and then it's often eka, the full form eka. And I mean, the eka form also must be the form which runs into Swedish jag, because breaking needs it must be a stressed form, the eka form jag, the Swedish jag and the Middle Swedish, and these forms are kind of breaking. They need stressed form. But would you say that ek in this position on Gallehus could be a fully stressed form? Would you assume in front of Hlevagastir, Holtjar, Horna, you would have full stress on ek? Seems very unlikely to me.
No, I have never assumed that. I'm just seeking for ultimate counter evidence. Thank you for the question. And a similar problem is with the negation yeah. The initial negation can, as far as I know, be both stressed, as in Vedic, and unstressed, as in, say, modern Bulgarian. So it's difficult to tell just basing on the linear position.
Yeah, but of course, in these kind of metrical verses like Völuspá 3-4, it is, and also Völuspá 3-3, vara sander ne sair, ne svalar unnir. It is very likely for ne to be unstressed, because we have a very clear case of forn iridislag, and this is an undoubted example of the verse types. So sander ne sair, ne svalar unnir, resolution and the S alliteration to occur, of course, and then ne must be unstressed and must be pretonic. It must be a dip and must be part of the metrical scheme. So, and also vara, that we have actually, as we point at Völuspá 3, we have an example where we also have actually pretonic material in the A line. So vara sander ne sair, ne svalar unnir. So as said, Sivas was very careful to account for the difference between Auftakt and metrically mandatory material. So, but you are perfectly right. I think there is still a good article by from the neo-grammarians about ne. One of Häusler's colleagues, Neckel, I think Neckel wrote an article on ne, quite a good one in a comparative Germanic perspective, which addresses this, what you say. So, but yes, it can be both stressed and unstressed. Right.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Michael.